I'm an independent journalist here in North Carolina, and let's get into some stories from the past week here in the Greater Triangle area of North Carolina. So, our first story up for the week, we have a Siler City police, not a police officer, but an employee of the police department who has been charged with fraud. Now, this case is a little more interesting here because it's not just any fraud; it is specifically fraud involving a certain type of visa. This is a U visa, and it is intended for victims of crime. So, basically, if you're a foreigner, if you're cooperating with the police, if you are you know I think it's mainly for victims, not for witnesses, but basically, allowing victims to stay in the country while the police are prosecuting some crime. And I have pretty much only heard about these U visas in the context of fraud. So before we get into the details of this case, let's talk a little bit about the U visa. So in 2022, an audit by the Office of the Inspector General titled USCIS U visa program is not managed effectively and is susceptible to fraud. That was the name of the OIG report. So basically, this is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. This report said they, one, did not adequately manage the U visa program or ensure that the program met its intended purpose. Two, approved foreigners with forged, unauthorized, altered, or suspicious certifications. Three, did not track fraud referrals. Four, did not establish performance metrics or track critical program data. Five, did not manage a significant backlog. And six, identified but did not address long-standing issues. And this isn't just a case of, sort of a behind-the-scenes report that had no connection to real life, because there have been multiple, pretty high-profile cases of fraud within the U visa program, both with fraudulent police reports being created to claim people are victims of crime when they're not, and even people staging crimes in order to get this U visa status, presumably for people who are not able to get a legal visa for whatever reason, whether it is, the country quotas, or they don't qualify for some other reason. So, one prosecution was for a man by the name of Rambai Patel, who collected $850,000 by conspiring with another Indian national to stage armed robberies at convenience and liquor stores and fast food restaurants in order to give this basis for store clerks and or owners to apply for fraudulent U visas. In another case down in Houston, another fraudster staging an armed robbery was shot by a bystander who thought this was a real crime that was happening, when actually the two victims of that armed robbery were in on it and had, presumably paid for this armed robbery to be staged. And in that case, those conspirators that set up the armed robbery had already obtained at least 4 U visas through these fraudulent crimes that they were staging. And a third example, just this July, the Department of Justice indicted 5 alleged conspirators, including 3 current and former Louisiana police chiefs, for engaging in what they say is over at least 9.5 years of conspiring to issue false police reports naming these foreign nationals as victims of crimes when no crime actually happened. So this visa is appears to be routinely abused, not just from the anecdotal evidence, but from the government's own reports. So here's what we have in this case. A woman named Gloria Maldonado, 57 years old, is accused of taking $6,400 in cash to assist 2 individuals in applying for U visas. So the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation is the agency that filed these charges. They say they were contacted by the Siler City Police Department to investigate these allegations. Maldonado is or was a domestic violence advocate with the Siler City Police Department, and that is one of the purposes of the U visa, is for victims of domestic violence, to be able to feel comfortable coming to the police, reporting the crime, and being assured that they will be able to keep their residency in the United States. Now, what's not clear about this case is whether these 2 individuals were actually victims of crime. So, was this a case of fraud? like the above, where two people who weren't victims of crime but wanted this visa status went to her and said, "We'll pay you money to, fraudulently file these reports," and then she never did. She just took the money. Or is this case where these were real victims of crimes who, were legitimately could have been genuine applicants for this visa, but then paid her for something that she should have been doing as part of her job anyway. If she's a domestic violence advocate, if she's supposed to be the one filing these forms or whatever, why would she be taking cash for something that's her job? If it's not her job, why is she taking cash for something that could be so close to her job? But anyway, what she is actually being charged with is that she promised this assistance and did not deliver it. But it's not clear whether that assistance would have been legal if she had provided it, because the allegation is that she took this $6,400 in cash and did not provide the assistance. The question is up in the air. Now, apparently, Siler City, I don't think it has that big of a population, but apparently it is a hotspot for illegal immigration. We have several stories over the past year involving some illegal aliens, if I recall correctly, in Siler City, accused of statutory rape and possibly kidnapping. So I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of illegal aliens, probably Hispanics, not Indians, as in some of these other cases, that maybe want to get some legal visa status. But that is the question. That is, we don't know. That is information that was not provided in the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation press release. But that's the question that I have. And so our next story here is also related to immigration, about Carrboro and Durham. And if you're familiar with these cities, well, I guess I believe Carrboro is a town, Durham is a city. They are fairly liberal jurisdictions. And last week, the Durham City Council approved a Fourth Amendment workplace resolution. Now, this appears to be part of a broader campaign to get this passed, because Carrboro passed a resolution with extremely similar language in, I believe it was May. So it's basically saying that immigration enforcement is unconstitutional seizure, and that second generation and non-immigrants were being, quote, harassed. And so basically this resolution orders the city manager to, quote, direct city staff to uphold the Fourth Amendment at their workplace. So this is couched in constitutional language. The Constitution that is intended to protect citizens, it is couched in that language, and couched to say, well, maybe they're harassing people who aren't actually illegal aliens. But if we look at the group behind this, which is Siembra NC, if we look at these same politicians in Durham, they are also fighting explicitly for people who are illegal aliens not to be subject to immigration enforcement. So for all the language around constitutional rights, this is really just about not enforcing immigration laws. Even they held a protest, sort of an emergency response protest at the Durham courthouse for a convicted felon who ICE was wanting to pick up. So a convicted felon who is not in the country legally, ICE wanted to deport him. And even that illegal alien, these Durham politicians, extremely liberal, one of these city councilors is even a Democratic Socialist or endorsed by the Democratic Socialists. So these are very liberal people. And for all the constitutional language, that's not really the point. The point is to protect illegal aliens. My question is, why would there be any illegal aliens employed at the city of Durham workplaces or the town of Carrboro? Do they actually think they're employing illegal aliens? Because if they're knowingly employing illegal aliens, I would think that would be a crime of some sort. But what do I know? I am not a lawyer. And our next story here is another, involving another law enforcement officer accused of abusing their office. And in this case, it is a Wake County detention officer who has been charged with trafficking cocaine, cannabinoids, and Suboxone to inmates at the John H. Baker Jr. Public Safety Center. So that is the, well, I guess that's technically like the block in downtown Raleigh that has one of the jails in it. And so basically, she's a detention officer. So the sheriff says that the department took immediate action as soon as these allegations were reported. that, quote, the community can remain confident that this office continues to uphold the highest standards of professionalism and accountability. Now, from what I've heard anecdotally, both from inmates at the North Carolina prison system as well as various other sources, is that the contraband in prisons, whether it's phones, whether it's drugs, whatever that contraband is, it is often the guards that are bringing it in. So this, from what I heard, this is a systemic issue. So the question is, why was this, if this is pretty common, why was this particular officer charged? Is it because the Wake County Sheriff's Department is really trying to crack down on it? Is it because this one just happened to be reported? Or is there some other reason potentially? We don't know, but obviously, if she is actually bringing in drugs for prisoners, I'm glad they caught her. And our next story here is another one of these anti-Trump protests. So there have been a series of these nationwide anti-Trump protests where they gather in, some of them have been over 1,000 towns and cities across America to express their displeasure at Trump. And so the latest one was on Labor Day. The title of it was the Workers Over Billionaires protest. The Durham location, at least, was organized in I guess cooperation with some union groups, the Triangle Labor Council and the Union of Southern Service Workers. So it's kind of, a Labor Day, a worker themed protest. But these are generally anti-Trump protests. But the attendance was a lot scarcer at this latest protest than it has for some of the protests earlier this year. For the No Kings protest in June, I estimated that there was a total of 5,000 to 15,000 at the various locations across the triangle. There were 10 to 12 locations across the triangle. So, lots of towns and cities, not just Raleigh, not just Durham. But in this case, it was a lot smaller. Reportedly, it was only hundreds, even in these major cities, Raleigh, Durham. So there's an image from Chapel Hill. I don't know what the crowd was like there, but the only image I could find, I believe, was these two individuals. Not quite a picture of the crowd, which they have definitely had large protests and these anti-Trump protests in Chapel Hill and Carrboro. In Durham, it was larger. Once again, there is some union involvement in the organization of these demonstrations. Hillsborough, at least dozens there lining the street. I believe that is across from the old courthouse in Hillsborough, and in Raleigh as well, a more sizable crowd. But once again, the news is only reporting that those were hundreds of rallying in Raleigh as opposed to previous events attracting thousands. So the question really is, why do people go to protest? Sometimes they're trying to raise awareness for a cause. I don't think there's necessarily any awareness being raised for the anti-Trump cause. I think most people, have already sort of made up their mind on that front. Do they support Trump? Do they not support Trump? Are they, trying to organize, trying to get people together, trying to get local people to be connected with each other? Possibly. Are they trying to, keep that momentum up? We'll see. If that's the case, then, it might be a bad sign for them that the momentum may be declining. I think that the question really is whether they can turn the grassroots support against Trump into. So, these are often the same people coming to each protest, but if you have a couple thousand people who are willing to devote some time and energy, that might be able to push the needle a bit in local elections. We have we have municipal elections coming up. We have the midterms coming up. So that's really the question, politically speaking, in terms of the effect of these protests is, the people who are passionate enough to go out to multiple anti-Trump protests, will they bring that energy, and can they put that energy to use in actually winning elections? And our final story here is about gun control. Now, I assume, most of my audience is right-leaning. That is the audience I target by providing an alternative to the mainstream media that is left-wing dominated by these mainstream media outlets like WRAL and the News and Observer. I try to do it a little differently And, a big part of that is that I am coming at these issues from the right, and that definitely is the case for gun control. So we had these walkouts last week at a number, I believe, about 10 local schools and North Carolina State University as well. And so, what kind of struck me is one of the articles I was reading reported that the students from the Cary High School who were walking out had signs reading "This is not normal." And so these protests were sort of a response to this tragic shooting at the Annunciation Catholic Church, which the murderer killed 2 children and wounded 21 more people. I believe it was 18 children were wounded and 3 adults were wounded. And so these protests were in response to that. And I don't want to say that I don't want to portray all of the participants as, these sort of you know, ideologically motivated ghouls who will jump on any tragedy to push their anti-gun agenda. But I was really inspired to look at the actual figures, because "this is not normal" implies that school shootings are normal. And I don't think the figures back that up. So let's break down some of the figures. So in the United States of America, we have over 130,000 schools, colleges, and universities. Now, the colleges and universities are only a pretty small percentage of that. Most of those are K through 12 institutions, over 100,000 K through 12 institutions here in the United States. And so, according to the list of school shootings compiled by Wikipedia, they break down into those defined as mass murder. So that is 4 or more deaths, excluding the shooter. So, according to this list, there has been a maximum of 1 or 2 per year. In the past 25 years, a maximum of 1 or 2. So some years have 0, school shootings that are mass murders. Some have 1, some have 2, for an average of 0.64 per year. So in a nation with over 100,000 schools, we have an average of less than 1 mass murder school shooting per year. Now let's be gracious and expand the definition, because under that definition of mass murder, even the shooting at Annunciation Church would not count, because there were only 2 dead. Even if we count all school shootings, so that is this massacre style shooting, as well as gang violence, as well as interpersonal violence, if we add all those together, any shooting that is related to a school, I believe even including school buses, we don't come to that high of a number. We come to 574 of these school shootings over the past 25 years, between 2000 and 2024. And in those 574 shootings, there were 462 victim fatalities and 844 wounded. So that means the average school shooting results in less than 1 person dying. Because once again, people often try to conflate these numbers for political purposes, because when you hear, 574 school shootings, you immediately think of the worst school shooting. You think of the Columbine, the Uvalde. But no, the vast majority of school shootings, are one fatality at most, or even no fatalities. Sometimes it's only a couple of people wounded, because most of these are not these massacre style school shootings, which are extremely rare. But even taking that broad definition, even bringing in all school shootings, is this something that is normal? So beyond the fact that there are over 100,000 schools across the whole United States, if we want the rate of school shooting deaths per student, we have approximately 68 million students in America. So that is K through 12 students, as well as college and university students, because these school shooting numbers are including K through 12, college, and university. Now, 68 million is actually, sort of on the low end. So we're overestimating. We're going to be overestimating this rate at anything, because not everyone who is killed or wounded in a school shooting is a student. Some of them are staff, faculty, people wandering by. Those are counted in the numbers. But just for simplicity's sake, for this back of the napkin math, we'll say 68 million students. So if we take the numbers from 2024, which was actually a worse year than average for school shootings, we had 28 victim fatalities and 56 shootings. So if you divide that 28 victim fatalities among the 68 million students, that is 0.4 school shooting fatalities per 100,000 students. And that is a common denominator for rates, for various types of crime, is 100,000. And 0.04 per 100,000, that is an extremely low rate. So for comparison, let's take the number of annual child drownings in North Carolina. As we would say, that's not normal, right? It's not normal for children to drown in North Carolina. You don't hear about children drowning very often in North Carolina. So I believe this is the latest report from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in North Carolina. There were I believe it was a little over 20 drownings among children under the age of 18 in North Carolina in 1 year, for a rate of 1.12 per 100,000. So that means a child is almost 30 times more likely to drown. A North Carolina child is almost 30 times more likely to drown than a student is to be killed in a school shooting. So why no protests for child drowning, saying this is not normal? Objectively, school shootings, dying in a school shooting, is extremely not normal. It is pretty much the definition of not normal. But these rare events that happen maybe once or twice a year, they're blown up over all the media. Not like a child drowning. Not like 10 children drowning. Not like 20 children drowning across a year. Does not merit the same level of media coverage of one mass shooting. Maybe one mass shooting in the entire year. That is what could be on the other side of the country. It could be anywhere in the United States, and that will be all over the news here in North Carolina. And I believe that is part of why people have this misperception as to how common school shootings are. And I would say that is comparable towards the public's misconceptions around perhaps a topic like the shootings of unarmed Black men by police officers. So there was a polling in 2020, and the majority of very liberal respondents to this poll in 2022 estimated the number of unarmed Black men shot in America at least 2 orders of magnitude higher. So the rate, about like 10 to 20 unarmed Black men are killed by police every year in America. Very little respondents, the majority of them were saying 1,000 or 10,000. That is so many orders of magnitude off. But when you think about it, every unarmed Black man who is killed by police in America, there's a good chance that is going to be all over the news, perhaps even a national news cycle. When you had even armed Black men like Jacob Blake, who had a knife, who was shot. That was national news. He wasn't even killed. Perhaps when you think of George Floyd, all over the news, huge political ramifications, huge national ramifications for one death. So here's my question. If anyone who happens to listen to this or happens to be watching this, if you feel passionate about gun control, why is it that one event halfway across the country garners more of a response than the 50 or so murders in the Triangle so far this year? The 15-year-old killed in Durham this year, the 16-year-old killed in Durham this year, the 17-year-old killed in Durham this year. 3 people under the age of 18 killed in Durham this year. That's more deaths than the Annunciation Church shooting. And that's not even counting however many people have been wounded in shootings in Durham. And truth be told, it would probably be easier to formulate an effective legislative solution that would be minimally invasive to reduce the number of shootings in Durham and in Raleigh. Because unlike these crazy trans people who shoot up a school with no prior criminal convictions, a lot of the people committing murders, other than school shootings, do have criminal convictions. And keeping them in prison longer, punishing them more harshly, not letting them back out on the street when they repeatedly commit the same offenses, like this man did in Charlotte, who was caught on video stabbing a Ukrainian refugee on the train. If you keep those people in jail longer, if you punish them more justly for their pattern of criminal behavior, perhaps that would actually reduce the number of homicides. Whereas, given the fact that so many murders are committed with handguns, that is the most common gun used in murder, bans on assault weapons will probably negligibly reduce the homicide rate, if at all. That's just the truth. Banning assault weapons isn't going to measurably reduce the number of homicides in America, because the vast majority of homicides are not committed with assault weapons, even if we're going to use that liberal propaganda term for any rifle that they find scary looking. Now, mass shootings are more likely to be committed with a rifle than the average homicide. And especially these massacre style mass shootings, where it's not just, a gang shootout where multiple people are hit. These massacre style killings more likely to be committed with a rifle. But even if you eliminated all of those are such a tiny percent of the total homicide rate. So there's another poll done in 2019 found that 25% of Americans believe that mass shootings were the most common form of gun death in America, compared to only 23% choosing the correct answer, which is suicide. The most common form of gun death is suicides. In fact, there are 60 to 70 times more suicides than there are mass shooting deaths. And that is including not just school mass shootings. That is including gang-related mass shootings. That is including interpersonal violence. If you're familiar with Steve Saylor's rule of mass shootings, they don't know that a whole lot of mass shootings are not the sort of typical massacre style mass shootings where someone is going out and attempting to kill as many people as possible. Some of the mass shootings are one person shooting at another person and just missing a lot, or one person randomly shooting into a crowd, because they're his ops or whatever, or, multiple people shooting at each other and bystanders getting hit, whatnot. That is including all those mass shootings, and still the number of suicides is so much higher. But yet, many Americans believe that mass shootings are the most common form of gun death in America. Another survey in 2022 found that 32% of parents were very or extremely worried about a shooting at their children's school. Once again, over 100,000 schools. So when you hear about one mass shooting, keep that in mind. This is still extremely rare, extremely not normal, because every mass shooting makes the news. Every mass shooting you hear about, if you are at all engaged in paying attention and watching the news and reading the news and hearing about the news on social media, you will hear about every mass shooting, because they're not common. And because they're not common, they are that much more newsworthy. When someone is killed every week in Raleigh or Durham, sure, it makes the news, but it's not all over the news because it's not as newsworthy. What is more common is less newsworthy. When a dog bites a man, sure, that could be newsworthy. But when a man bites a dog, wow, now that's extraordinary. And that's as extraordinary as a mass shooting at a school. So all that to say, the perception of mass shootings at schools in America does not match at all what is actually the case. And in fact, this is probably true for the European perception of America as well, because when there is a mass shooting, it is so newsworthy that even the Europeans hear about it. So they assume that it is far more common than it actually is, which is extremely rare. So for these students, I don't entirely blame them for being caught up in the propaganda, because it is not only it is not the students who decide to plaster these mass shootings everywhere. In fact, there might be less mass shootings if they talked about them less, because many of these mass shootings are inspired by other mass shooters that they hear about. So is two students killed in a mass shooting actually that much more newsworthy than two homicides in two separate locations? I don't know. It's more newsworthy when it happens together. It's more newsworthy when a number of children are injured as well. It's more newsworthy when it's children who are the victims of crime. But is it really that much newsworthy that you would hear about it even if you barely follow news at all? If you would hear about it when you haven't heard about all 50 murders in the Triangle this year? Anyway, in addition to Cary High School, there were student walkouts reported at Enloe, Heritage, Knightdale, Leesville Road, Millbrook, Sanderson, and Wake County, as well as Orange High School is in Orange County, and NC State, Wake Technical Community College, the RTP campus, and the Wake Early College of Information and Biotechnology. Now, some of these had just a handful of students participating, but others were, the crowd looked to be over 100 from the aerial shots from mainstream media. So maybe 400 to 1,200 demonstrators total across all these locations. It's kind of hard to know for sure, but definitely a number of students partaking. Now, how many of these students just wanted an opportunity to walk out? I don't know. How many actually feel strongly about this issue? I don't know. So this was organized by the gun control group Students May in Action, which I believe is part of Everytown for gun safety. So they're going to be that group will be for gun control no matter what happens. No matter what the actual rate of school shootings, they will obviously seize on any newsworthy event like this to push their cause. And I will seize on any newsworthy event to point out the actual facts, because that is what I do here at This Week in the Triangle. You can find this in newsletter form over at triangletrumpet.news. That is where I publish a weekly newsletter with stories like these about occurrences that go on in the Triangle. I select a couple of stories each week to talk about. I also publish original reporting. Sometimes that is investigative, sometimes that is interviewing people, but original stories and the weekly roundup. If you're interested in that, head over to triangletrumpet.news. And thank you for tuning in.